welcome all of you to our, probably the first of quite a few community forums on elementary school. Everybody actually magically did what we thought they would, which is grab some food and find a place to sit. I'm going to turn the description of the evening over to Dave Stolz, and the school board is excited to start this process and to hear what you all have to say. And so thanks again for coming, and let's get started.
Well, Joe, would you like to, now that you just took a bite of food?
So this meeting...
Introduce yourself, and also Mark and Peter, would you also just say hi?
Sure. Go ahead.
Peter Yost, school board member.
Mark Truant, school board member.
And we've got some principals and the superintendent and the director of early ed services.
And that would be me, Deb Gass.
Deb Gass.
Ron Staley.
Jen.
Hi, Jen Hester, Principal of Oak Grove.
Jen O'Neill, Assistant Principal Academy.
Andy Petrilli, Principal here at Academy.
And John Reed, principal at Green Street.
So thanks again for all of you for coming out. This kind of came about, actually we started thinking of it a long time ago, maybe back in May or June, and we just wanted to hear from people in the community, parents in particular. What do we want for our kids? What should school look like? And then we've had some other discussions in the fall, and we've heard from some people on specific issues already. So this particular evening is designed with some broader questions. And so Dave's going to walk you through how we're going to do tonight, and I think we're already behind schedule, but we're going to try for 7:30.
Yeah, we were going to have the video clip running by now, but we kind of recognize things don't always work out as planned. But we already did the welcome part, and what we're going to do is show a brief clip by an educator named Sir Kenneth Robinson called Changing Education Paradigms, and it's got a much broader look at school and learning than you typically encounter, particularly at school board meetings or conversations at the Price Chopper. And what we'd like you to do is, after the clip, it's about 6.5 minutes, is in the groups at your tables, just kind of talk about the concepts and talk about some of the ideas that were contained in there. And I cut out some of the images and some of the concepts on the sheets that are on the table because it goes really fast, and it's really hard to sort of understand what's going on. So you might want to use those as a guideline, and just jot down on the chart paper that's on the table some of the ideas and thoughts that you have. And we'll do that for about 15 minutes or so, unless people are really engaged and want to go a little longer. Then we'd like to have you choose somebody at each table and just mention 2 or 3 of the top things, the things that everybody agreed on or everybody thought were pretty important. So, and circle them on the chart so we also have a record of it. And just kind of share that out so we can get a sense of what some of the themes might be or some of the ideas that people have that are kind of broadly shared. The purpose of this is to get a really broad sense of what this community wants from the schools, to gradually develop a vision for the schools that will guide all of our work. So after that, we're going to, after we're done with that, the generating the ideas and sharing them, we're going to ask you to choose one of the 3 questions that was on the flyer that was advertised. What's working? What do we want more of? And then, given budget realities, where should we focus? And I was going to have the what's working people be on this side of this room, and the what do we want more of on this side of the room, and then the budget realities people in the adjacent classroom. But since we all fit in here, I think I would ask the budget people to come up to the front and then find an available table. So when we get to that point, I'll mention that again. And there also are a couple of these on each of your tables to help you if you can't make any sense of what I'm saying. And we want to do a similar thing. Have you talk about that question, write down your ideas on the second sheet of paper, and then have someone report back what your thinking was on those after about 15 minutes or so. That will bring us probably to 7:30, maybe a little bit past. And at that point, since we said we would end at 7:30, if people want to leave, they can. We have a series of slides, almost a video that was put together by the Vermont School Board Association and the Public Assets Institute, which talks about it's a situational analysis of Vermont schools. And it talks about how much money we're spending, what our what the results have been, what the outcomes have been from our investment, the average, the ratio of teachers to students, the administrators to students, the trends in population and demographics, the trends in just pretty much anything you can imagine having to do with schools and school financing. And it compares Vermont to the other New England states and to the national average. And although we're different in a lot of ways we're similar, but, well, I won't tell you the conclusions of the video, but hopefully you'll be able to stay. I will tell you one conclusion. We spend a lot and we get really good results as based on that spending and based on the work that we do across the state. And that's on national and international tests, not just the ones that we use among these states. So I'm going to shut up and ask Andy to push it off.
Very beginning.
Every country on earth at the moment is reforming public education. There are two reasons for it. The first of them is economic. People are trying to work out, how do we educate our children to take their place in the economies of the 21st century? How do we do that? Given that we can't anticipate what the economy will look like at the end of next week, as the recent turmoil is demonstrating. How do we do that? The second, though, is cultural. Every country on earth is trying to figure out, how do we educate our children so they have a sense of cultural identity and so that we can pass on the cultural genes of our communities while being part of the process of globalization. How do we square that circle? The problem is they're trying to meet the future by doing what they did in the past. And on the way, they're alienating millions of kids who don't see any purpose in going to school. When we went to school, we were kept there with a story, which was if you worked hard and did well and got a college degree, you would have a job. Our kids don't believe that. And they're right not to, by the way. You're better having the degree than not, but it's not a guarantee anymore. And particularly not if the route to it marginalizes most of the things that you think are important about yourself. And so people say we have to raise standards as if this is a breakthrough. You know, like, really, yes, we should. Why would you lower them? You know, I haven't come across an argument that persuades me of lowering them. But raising them, of course we should raise them. The problem is that the current system of education was designed and conceived and structured for a different age. It was conceived in the intellectual culture of the Enlightenment and in the economic circumstances of the Industrial Revolution. Before the middle of the 19th century, there were no systems of public education. Not really. I mean, you could get educated by Jesuits, you know, if you had the money. But public education, paid for from taxation, compulsory to everybody and free at the point of delivery, that was a revolutionary idea. And many people objected to it. They said it's not possible for many street kids, working class children, to benefit from public education. They're incapable of learning to read and write, and why are we spending time on this? So there's also built into it a whole series of assumptions about social structure and capacity. It was driven by an economic imperative of the time, but running right through it was an intellectual model of the mind, which was essentially the Enlightenment view of intelligence. That real intelligence consists in the capacity for a certain type of deductive reasoning and a knowledge of the classics originally, what we come to think of as academic ability. And this is deep in the gene pool of public education. There are really two types of people, academic and non-academic. Smart people and non-smart people. And the consequence of that is that many brilliant people think they're not, because they've been judged against this particular view of the mind. So we have twin pillars, economic and intellectual. And my view is that this model has caused chaos in many people's lives. It's been great for some. There have been people who have benefited wonderfully from it. But most people have not. Instead, they suffer this. This is the modern epidemic, and it's as misplaced and it's as fictitious. This is the plague of ADHD. Now, this is a map of the incidence of ADHD in America, or prescriptions for ADHD. Don't mistake me here. I don't mean to say there is no such thing as attention deficit disorder. I'm not qualified to say if there is such a thing. I know that a great majority of psychologists and paediatricians think there is such a thing, but it's still a matter of debate. What I do know for a fact is it's not an epidemic. These kids are being medicated as routinely as we had our tonsils taken out, and on the same whimsical basis, and for the same reason, medical fashion. Our children are living in the most intensely stimulating period in the history of the earth. They're being besieged with information and calls for their attention from every platform, computers, from iPhones, from advertising holdings, from hundreds of television channels. And we're penalizing them now for getting distracted. From what? Boring stuff. At school, for the most part. It seems to me it's not a coincidence totally that the incidence of ADHD has risen in parallel with the growth of standardized testing. Now, these kids are being given Ritalin and Adderall and all manner of things, often quite dangerous drugs, to get them focused and calm them down. But according to this, attention deficit disorder increases as you travel east across the country. People start losing interest in Oklahoma. They can hardly think straight in Arkansas. And by the time they get to Washington, they've lost it completely. And there are separate reasons for that, I believe. It's a fictitious epidemic. If you think of it, the arts, and I don't say this exclusively the arts, I think it's also true of science and of maths, but I say about the art particularly because they are the victims of this mentality currently, particularly. The arts especially address the idea of aesthetic experience. An aesthetic experience is one in which your senses are operating at their peak, when you're present in the current moment, when you're resonating with the excitement of this thing that you're experiencing, when you are fully alive. An anesthetic is when you shut your senses off and deaden yourself to what's happening. And a lot of these drugs are that. We're getting our children to education by anesthetizing them. And I think we should be doing the exact opposite. We shouldn't be putting them asleep. We should be waking them up to what they have inside of themselves. But the model we have is this. I believe we have a system of education that is modeled on the interests of industrialism and in the image of it. I'll give you a couple of examples. Schools are still pretty much organized on factory lines, ringing bells, separate facilities, specialized into separate subjects. We still educate children by batches. We put them through the system by age group. Why do we do that? Why is there this assumption that the most important thing kids have in common is how old they are? It's like the most important thing about them is their date of manufacture. Well, I know kids who are much better than other kids at the same age in different disciplines, or at different times of the day, or better in smaller groups than in large groups, or sometimes they want to be on their own. If you're interested in a model of learning, you don't start from this production line mentality. It's essentially about conformity, and increasingly it's about that as you look at the growth of standardized testing and standardized curricula. And it's about standardization. I believe we've got to go in the exact opposite direction. That's what I mean about changing the paradigm.
What do you think? And please write down as much as you possibly can so we've got a record of it. That's how we're going to start it.
If you're not interested in, but if you're intimidated by something in life, you avoid it. To what I saw, kids could avoid things, and they weren't wired really to.
I know
That could be part of that. I just don't know how they get a system. Or
It's not.
No, you can start. But it is difficult because I know my youngest is always super like, okay, I would do this. It's kind of boring. I do more advanced stuff on my own on the computer. Or this is a much it is difficult because they don't have, the schools, like you said, are not
teachers. And they touched on this very same topic that we just spoke about, how we're still conforming to this old-fashioned way of teaching our kids and organizing and age classes and things like a factory, just like they presented. But that's not the time. And I have a real issue, and so do they, with this whole standardized testing scheme. It's a disaster because teachers are forced to tie in their hands and they're forced to teach to a test. Standardized testing is
Look how fun.
And I'm using fun as a really
Fun and waking people up.
but these projects that they're doing, and you know, I know
Aren't sort of heavily surveilled.
turnaround. He's got 90%. And he has to
She was going to be fine.
So they're taking the really disadvantaged kids, and they have all kinds of support, but it's a big
Well, it's an independent school. So public school is an independent school. And kids, so there has to be private.
right.
Yes, they have to be at school. So what does that mean? A tradition for them to attend. Tuesday.
So, but you'll need any chance to do the fine. Right, so they're in instruction.
Right, but going back to naming it, but the funding is not bottom. So like that, like
why not make it go for another key?
So, Kate, since your table is the last one to stop talking, would you start off? Whoever is going to share the sort of game ideas or concepts or game up with, please.
They're making me tired.
Folks, please.
Our table focused in on tests. That was pretty much all we focused in on. There was a little bit more on reducing distractions and keeping people engaged in classes by keeping things hands-on. I'll just read through the list real quick. How do you prepare kids for jobs that don't exist yet? Test scores can be roadblocks. Grading schools on tests that kids don't buy into might not be wise. Everyone learns differently. Testing as a focus throws everything askew. We had a discussion about being results-oriented versus unfolding ideas. The world doesn't operate on tests. They work. People go off and they do work, not tests usually. Real skills and hard work versus test-taking skills. We have reducing distractions. Hands-on equals being engaged. Stop teachers being judged by tests and the student scores. Social and economic issues play a part in the success of a student. And why do we care about how other people rank us? Why not gather the courage to possibly evaluate, assess, and rank ourselves?
This is our list. Other intelligences, funding tied to testing tracks everyone, extracurricular opportunities, assessments versus creative selves, how do you do both, Technology, meet learners to stimulate them and get them inquisitive about new things. Enrichment, exposure for all, how can it be done? Traditional versus non-traditional, how can you combine? Because we were saying, what does it even look like? Because all we really know is the factory model. So what does the non-factory model look like? Conformity and standardization. How do you evaluate in this model? How do you know what learners know and what they don't? And we were talking about a model that isn't a factory model without tests. Batches of learners versus readiness. So that was non-date of manufacture. What does the new model look like? How do you start? Everyone is losing out, both ends in the middle. Where does the middle fit? Because the high flyers can get enrichment and the low flyers get support, but the middle seems kind of lost. And then we came up with balanced life, school, world.
We talked about intense stimulation, ADHD, how to meet the needs of boys, and that there's more stimulation and technology in the classroom, which is also a challenge. Academic versus the non-academic track felt was less relevant today. Everyone needs communication skills, writing skills, computer skills, math skills, social skills, no matter what job they end up in. Whether it's academic or vocational or whatever, you need all these skills today with today's technology. Testing. We talked about not all skills can be measured by tests. Some tests have gotten better as a diagnostic prescriptive tool for teachers. And formative assessments versus high stakes tests. The feeling was that high stakes tests don't serve us, and that just the skills that are involved in taking the test create a filter which skews the results.
We touched on a rather wide variety without coming to any conclusions. Starting to sound like a common theme here. We touched briefly on how do we group kids, and if that's not how we should, how would we begin to think of it if it's not age? We immediately said we could talk about ability. Suddenly you have other issues about labeling kids and the difficulties that poses to teachers and administrators and to the kids themselves if they're being labeled in such a way. We talked a little bit about the variety of factors that might be contributing to ADHD. We have some strong feelings at this table about what is or isn't appropriate, or are not appropriate ways to think about ADHD and how to treat it. How do we tackle that variety of issues in the classroom? We also touched on the challenge of both the amount and the range of stimulation that the students that we see coming through our schools now are facing, that are in many ways much greater than anything we ever faced. How do I, as an educator, using the toolkit that I pick up as I learn as I go, how do I find new tools that might meet the needs of kids who are facing challenges I never faced? We talked about addressing the broader range of children's learning styles, not just ADHD, but the child who learns entirely has to write it down 6 times versus the child who learns by expressing it artistically, or we didn't get into that level of detail, but we touched on that, the variety of learning styles. We also pointed, it came up that children who are labeled in a particular way may often shine somewhere else. The example we had was the behavior issue child who turns out to be absolutely entirely engaged by the artistic endeavor. And where do you go with that? How do you make that a useful piece of information? And that's about as far as we
We had a wide-ranging discussion as well, but some of the themes we touched on is that the first thing we said was it's overwhelming just to think about the whole picture that Ken Robinson was talking about, but that any kind of change needs to be incremental and slow. That learning needs to be meaningful for all students. It has to have some kind of meaning for them if they're going to be invested in it at all. The need for creating a balanced education, including parent education opportunities. I heard some echoes of that over here. And the need for teaching emotional intelligence and kids to delay the instant gratification is really key, and that, I think, ties into the overstimulation that many of our kids are facing now. And we also discussed people with unique challenges that we never faced, and the challenge of dealing with that. And also, we touched on multi-age groupings rather than the strict, age level, 10-year-olds, 11-year-olds, 12-year-olds, and so on. Because it didn't come up in the conversation with something I've always thought about is, in the K-12 education, that's really the only time in your life you do that. When you go out in the real world to work, you're working with people of all different ages. And so it's really kind of a unique way that they're all grouped as they go through school.
We started out talking about the possibility of change to, such a sort of a daunting bit of information, how it looked like everything in that video was kind of wrong, not what we want for our schools. So to what degree is incremental change possible, or to what degree could it actually have any impact if things were to change incrementally, and rather than just sort of exploding the whole model as we know it. Those are sort of two of the options. And we harkened back to the portfolio system of the 90s, I think we were saying, in which students could be assessed on a whole portfolio of information. We wondered about how it might be possible in the digital age to have digital portfolios that are more acceptable to colleges and universities and other further schooling opportunities, because they're more and more open to different ways of students being assessed. So maybe we should relook at something that might express who a student is and their various multiple intelligences. Some of those phrases that were pretty powerful and strong and good in the 80s and 90s that have been kind of left behind as we move forward with standardized testing. We talked about having students work in team situations and be evaluated in team environments more than just individual assessment. It matters a lot in this world how we work with others, how we build community, how we do that sort of thing. We talked about the need for a school that somehow helps students to identify their passion in life, because a student who is passionate about something will, in fact, find a way to success. That is possible in a school system, particularly with having the benefit of all the various athletic and arts stuff that we have going on in this community, as well as the vocational work in the Career Center. So helping students find the passion that will ignite them, and that will then allow them to study forestry and have that tie in with their English or with their math or however that works. So is there anything else that we talked about? That's good. That's it, maybe.
We talked about that we expect schools to be de facto parents. We need to reinforce schooling at home. It starts at home. Family boundaries around electronics. PTO is more than baking cookies. Concerns of accountability from parents. Concern of overwhelm of change. Concern of overwhelming of change in the machine of education. Is that what that is?
Yeah, teaching to the bottom and poverty.
Teaching to the bottom and issue of poverty. Big issue seems to be who is held accountable for students' tardy issues. This impacts our classroom significantly. You cannot divorce what is happening in the schools with what is happening at home. Standardized testing is a problem and distracts from our children's needs. And I think some of us, including myself, thought the video was an interesting model because we have been teaching to the old model, and I think it's time for some change.
Possibly because of the composition of our table, we really ended up focusing in on the reality that kids who feel safe are the kids who end up being able to learn. But making kids feel safe isn't like something that happens overnight. Kids come into a system. It can take 6 months before that child is settled enough to be able to really dig in and start learning. At the same time that that's a reality, we have an absolute groundswell and an epidemic of homelessness going on in Windham County right now. An awful lot of the kids who my kids are going to school with don't know where they're going home in the afternoon. They don't know which bus to take because they don't know which hotel they're staying at that night. There are huge changes going on in other systems which are going to affect the educational system, particularly the welfare to work system is changing overnight, is going to change tremendously in May. That's going to impact an awful lot of the families that are right now clinging by their fingernails to stability and to being able to afford housing in our area. We need to think about that. We talked a lot about the fact that kids from out of control situations act out of control sometimes, and that there are kids who, again, we sort of talk about there are these issues that we didn't all face when we were kids. You know, we can also say there's a heroin epidemic. It's not a secret, I don't think, anymore. It was on the front cover of the Boston Globe on Sunday in the state of Vermont. This is absolutely impacting kids here today in this town, and will impact them tonight and will impact them tomorrow morning. We talked a little bit about the mixed age group. We all think it's a great idea. Some things that we think are working tremendously well, especially along what we talked about, small groups tend to have more mixed age instruction, but that tends to be the kids who are receiving special education services versus the kids who maybe are on another end of the spectrum, and absolutely we miss an awful lot of kids on another end of the spectrum. Or we assume that kids who are in special education don't also meet the other end of the spectrum. There's an awful lot of room there. And then just something that I wanted to say that I keep thinking about because I watch it happen is that there are sort of two different voices as far as I can tell around the food issue related to our school. There's wonderful information that comes home about farm to families and CSAs that we can join, and kids come to school and they taste spinach and they have these great experiences, and at the same time kids are exposed to a tremendous amount of sugar throughout the course of their day. It's built into the system. If they behave well enough, then the class gets a pizza party. If things go really, really well, then they get some ice cream. The school bus drivers, you know, my daughter, without anybody asking me, gets 2 M&Ms if she behaves well on the special education bus on the way home, but only 1 M&M if she doesn't behave well. So I just think that there's room for us to really think about what the messages are that we're sending home around food, whether or not we should be sending any messages at all. The messages that we send home are mixed.
We focused on the arts are the victims of this mentality area of the film. And we talked about the old-fashioned concept of themes in a classroom. And when perhaps a first grade classroom is studying maybe the rainforest, and by the end of the year, the whole room looks like a rainforest. And how that kind of project-based learning can really inspire kids and include kids across the whole spectrum of learners in their activity during the day. We talked about project-based learning, developing dexterity and hand-eye coordination, and how there are so many jobs still in the 21st century. We're still human. We still need plumbers and hairdressers and surgeons and dentists and all kinds of people who have to use their hands well. And being an art teacher, I've just noticed over the years that kids are really having a hard time just learning how to really use scissors skillfully or use a straight edge to really make a nice straight edge. They're lacking in that kind of getting their hands in stuff. I mean, I think, you know, maybe once a year in Kathy Praps-Allen's classroom they use clay. Well, kids need to have their hands in clay and moving it around and manipulating stuff so that they're making that connection that, you know, will come in handy later in life. We also talked about how that those kind of projects develop creativity, help kids problem solve in creative ways. Let's see, it gives them an authentic experience during the day that they can really connect to. and have ownership over. They're you know, those little dioramas we used to make in shoeboxes. Kids love that stuff. And in the end, they persist, and in the end, they have this great little thing they can take home and be proud of. They own those things. Let's see, what else was there? Oh, these kind of, that old themes-based, project-based learning can give you know, kids an opportunity to really learn in a cross-curricular way, in that you can touch on math and science and social studies and art and all those things. They come together when there's a theme-based learning environment. And at the end of the day, that kind of authentic experience for kids can help them have a positive feeling toward the learning environment. They want to get back there. They want to get back to work on that thing and finish it and do it well. And so in the end, their whole attitude toward going to school can shift to be sort of a positive attitude toward the learning environment. And that's what we talked about.
So we really got focused on the idea that school needs to be fun in some ways for the kids, that they would be, that the Ritalin problem perhaps goes down if the kids are more focused because they're more excited. And so we looked at that being that they could choose how to learn, or maybe they should be grouped by interest, that maybe the arts and the academics balance has to be looked at, that kids can be integrated to help one another. And we just wanted them to be stimulated and have excitement, so the kids are drawn in through field trips, through the organization and the time in their classroom, and so they're just excited about being there. Did I miss anything?
Thank you. We certainly got lots of themes from that. Thank you. I guess I'm going to take a little break in just a second. What I'd like to do is read the 3 questions that we asked you to come here to share your ideas about as well, and then ask you to sort of raise your hand for which of those you're most interested, so I can figure out how to move people around and make sure everybody has a chair. So the 3 questions are: what's working? What do we want more of? And given budget realities, where should we focus? And so the people who are interested in talking about what's working in the schools, what we like and what's going on in the schools, would you raise your hands if you're interested in that primarily, that question? Okay, so I think that table over there might work for that group.
The teachers seem to be working.
Yeah, the teachers. The second question: what do we want more of? Who would like to kind of focus on that one? I think maybe a couple of tables back on that side. And then it looks like everybody else wants to talk about where should we focus. So I would say maybe from this table over, either stay here, and if you're going there, go to those tables so that people can have your seats.
Overarching themes at the tables was that how many challenges kids bring from home, and all the different emotional aspects that are happening, and they bring it to school. And the teachers, I know at Oak Grove, and from what I've heard, the other schools really work hard to collaborate and come up with best plans for their kids to meet their academic needs, but also their emotional and social needs and well-being.
Well, right, and also that there's always, it can be a pain to have these in-service days and having kids home. The fact that the teachers are always being trained with new information and, smart boards coming in and this coming in, and it's like, it's not stagnant. It's just like moving forward all the time. And honestly, being a kid going through school, I remember my teachers, I think like what they learned in school felt like it was what they were teaching us that day. And it wasn't like this constant refreshment of new information, which I feel here. Yeah.
Are we meant to talk about what's working at levels other than elementary?
Yeah, you can consider it. I'm high school. I think the music program is so good in the middle school and the high school. It's the star of that.
We have a kiddo who homeschooled and attended CCV from 14 to 16, who then found out that she was far more challenged and offered a far greater and more rigorous education in the advanced placement courses at the high school than she was accessing at CCV. And I thought that was interesting.
Sure. Yeah, they're hard.
There are tremendous opportunities.
I also really like, I know that in this school, my fifth grader, they read a book in class and then they went out and they built shelters from the book. And I was so thrilled that they did that because her imagination is bigger than this whole room, you know, it's rare to be able to play in it. So they went out and they made this structure. That's great.
I think
That's the theme.
I personally think we need more.
Yes, yeah, that's great.
More fun. We need more like hands-on interaction because my kids learn that way as well. Yeah. And I think I know it's hard to fit into the day, and that's always like the issue. I think, but we can't have too much of that. That's what the kids remember. They don't remember 2 + 2 barely, but like they remember the fun they have and they remember those experiences.
Because I hated nothing more than making dioramas. I hated that, so I remember hating it. So that's part of what we're talking about is the different ways of learning. Is that for me, I love dioramas. I'll still put the shoebox and craft.
I love cooking. I love dioramas. I love building shelters. But yes, it's.
Yeah,
but I think to interact both, right?
So, for example, at Green Street. But that's all we're meaning. I mean, you can make fun of dioramas, but there's a whole range. Yeah.
That was like studying a person and enacting that person and that sort of thing. But so there are just lots of different ways of doing that. And so I'm not at all saying that kind of experiential education doesn't work. I'm just saying that it's no better to say everybody needs this particular experiential education than it is to say everybody needs to read, because that's what we're talking about. Is everybody learns differently. And as an adult, I love that. As a kid, that wouldn't have been my thing.
Yeah.
To stand up there and be public and to speak publicly, I didn't like that at all. I just think that we need to be careful of saying that there's one way that's better than another way, because really I think the point is that everybody learns differently and developmentally are ready to sort of step out and present themselves at different ages. So that's
Maybe
what I
I
think
could
about.
jump in here. I'm Andy Davis. I've got 2 kids. My daughter has special needs. She's in the high school. She was served quite well in the elementary schools. We were both at Green Street and at Oak Grove, and my son did super and is at a very good college now, and we are always talking up the public schools. But when I heard the question, what's working, I didn't see a question for tonight about what's not working. So the more I thought about it, what's working? Well, working is a value-neutral term. Okay, when floodwaters pour down the whetstone, they do a lot of work. They remove bridges, they remove houses, they reroute the riverbank, and that's work. And some of what's working in our schools may be doing things accomplishing things, working in ways that we're not maybe completely aware of. When I hear about things happening, experiential learning projects and things like that, what I don't feel is a consistent permission to teachers. I feel as a staff person in the school that some teachers are being told no thematic units in your classroom. Turn in all of your lesson plans. Being written up for not being on the page that their lesson plan says to be on that day, that morning. And other teachers then getting up at staff meetings and talking about how they're modifying the curriculum. There's an inconsistency of philosophy that is actually working to create a climate in our schools of distrust. And that's a kind of working. The narrowing of curriculum, I think, is working to push away families who want a creative and more investigative type of schooling for their children. I hear of a number of children. I would love to get the statistic from the school board, the number of families that are leaving our public schools. So that's a kind of working. That's actually accomplishing something. It may be something we don't want to, maybe a job we don't want to be doing, but we're actually doing that job. Top-down decision.
I don't want to buy any more test scores than I have to.
Right. Yeah, and this is the crux of things, isn't it?
Self-assessment, that's something that we should all have time to do.
You mean like the
Can I ask you
language
a
classes
question?
once a week?
Yeah.
Like, if the curriculum were more individualized, would that address the issue I'm bringing up?
Potentially.
Where it was like tailored
Teach to the child rather
yeah,
than
to the individual
than to
child
the-
wherever they're.
Right,
So
and
that-
which brings up
How do you know that
the
you
whole
get it?
Montessori thing, which we're having a little side conversation about, where it's teaching to the child, and when they're ready to learn, knowing that light bulb moment, when to jump in and take it to the next level. I have a bias in that area, so I'm trying to
It's possible.
Not necessarily.
I didn't say it wasn't possible. And part of it is about, I think it's about creating a problem or a challenge that has enough entry points that the kid who really needs to enter at a basic level can do that, and the kid who's at a more advanced level can be working on that same
See if you can kind of finish your sentence and wrap up the conversation.
State. Which Tristan?
Because,
we didn't do that.
Because when Vermont's financing mechanism for education was challenged in court for not being equal, the answer that was developed in Act 60 and Act 68 was to take all of the aggregate budgets that were approved at every level in the state, add them all together, figure out how many students, equalized pupils there were, divide by that number, and that gives you your base rate. And then that establishes the tax rate. So some districts are high spenders, some are trying to be frugal like we are, but it's the aggregate of all of the Vermont budgets combined that is driving the cost shift primarily.
Well, that's not going to work over the long run. There's no incentive to keep costs down when another town raises your taxes.
Well, so
There
that's
are incentives.
there is a cap. So if you go a certain percentage above, you pay more. You basically get fined essentially for going too high. But you're right, and that's been the central tension for 15 years of that funding mechanism. But the problem is that we are now required by a ruling of our Supreme Court that whatever model we come up with has to be equitable for student spending. And so that means if we shift, we have to do it in a way that's consistent in some way with equity for per pupil spending. That's the standard, the constitutional standard that we have to meet. So everybody knows the system is flawed. No one's figured out yet a different mechanism that meets that legal standard, that puts the incentive where people want it. If a community wants to spend more, they can, and if a community wants to spend less, they can.
And I'll also just say that, when you do spend less and have a very flat and frugal budget, the tax rate may go up because folks in Montpelier might say, we're going to make it 5 cents more this year.
Well, except that we don't really decide that.
But the whole idea behind what we were supposed to be talking about is how do we take this budget, working within a budget or any budget, and producing something better. I would pose one question to everybody in that: what's the largest commodity we have in the schools?
See if there are one or two things that you really want to emphasize.
What's the largest commodity?
It's a long list, so I know that really cannot happen. If there are any sort of overarching themes.
You're right.
Maybe you should be helping
Town meeting is going to be the battle.
And the problem becomes that people aren't thinking, so since we have, Vermont's the second oldest state by population in the country, and Windham County is the oldest population in Vermont, that they're starting to become this, well, I don't need these services. And so you're starting to look at, I don't need them, so I don't want them. And when I look at the age demographic in the town rep, it is not, the younger generation who have kids in. And so there's a concern because we're losing the philosophical kind of community basis of public education, which is when you had kids, it was funded and it's a public good, and now it's starting to look at, well, it's too much and I'm not, so I'm going to cut it, and then what's the future on it? So there's this whole philosophical shift. Oh, yeah.
See it.
You can see
I mean,
it.
what town meeting?
Yeah.
We could cut the budget $1 million and still alter what we expect of our students.
Right.
And it's absolutely it. I mean,
given budget
programs
reality.
and all this and that, yes, I know that's worth money. But we could cut the budget, whatever, and still alter what it is we're expecting our students to do.
Because we are going to do assessment techniques.
That's right. All
And
these
we are going
questions have nothing
to
to do
develop
with
curriculum, and we are going to do teacher trainings. So all of that is planned expense. So what strategy we choose, if there's an opportunity to adapt to some of the ideas here, that's up to the administrations of the schools and to try to take something from this and build on it. We should hold them responsible for trying to at least think through how they might do that. I know that they can't do all of it.
Twice as big and say that's not so good, but we can still change what we did in those classes.
In public schools, we have a number of standards that we need to adhere to.
Yeah.
It's complicated. We're heavily regulated.
So is there a plan? So I'm just curious. You know that this is going to come. So
This is meeting number 1 of the plan.
No, what do you mean?
No,
mean
like a
budget?
strategic budget, how you're going to defend it. Sure.
That's
A few more minutes, you can stand listening. Okay, would you,
I think
okay. Conversation, that'd be great.
What we
Otherwise,
want more of, we talked first about thematic teaching, integrating various subject matters into a single theme that could be broad-based and that could encapsulate academic subjects as well as an arts teacher, I have a little bit of a hard time because so much of what I teach is so similar to what's academic, and so I kind of think of myself as an academic arts teacher. You know, I'm an arts teacher that is sort of just as serious about the study of what we do as academics teachers are. So, but where the arts and for lack of a better word, academic subjects can come together more. Let's see, what do we need more of? More time. Time, right? Maybe that means looking at the way the school day is structured and the very finite amount of time that's available from the time the kids get dropped off from the buses to the time the buses come to pick them up. And maybe it means thinking about what a school year is in order to be able to do more of the sort of learning that is important. But, so time to teach with breadth and depth versus sort of the mention and move on variety of teaching. That we find, our experiences are that as we are driven by data and we look at students as sort of these data points to which we're supposed to react and improve on, that the reaction seems to be, let's add more time to the teaching of that thing that we're not getting the sort of data that we want. And I'm not sure that that's really working, but that's coming at the expense of other opportunities that could be really, I think, be enriching learning. Authentic collaboration between students, and that idea of teaching collaboration, not just giving them opportunities to collaborate, but making that a real discrete skill that kids are learning about how to collaborate, how to work collaboratively with other students, and being able to model that as teachers collaborate together on teaching models. And the opportunity for students to use and explore creativity. For creativity also to be, this is a hard thing because a lot of us feel like, how do you teach creativity? But it's something that needs to be more central to, I think, to what students are given the opportunity to do, and that came up in our discussion. Authentic evaluations. It was brought up by Peter that in his job, you don't get a test, at the end of a year, if they're doing a performance evaluation of you, it's not about how well will you do on this test. It's about all the other aspects of how you've worked and what you've accomplished in that in your work. And so, maybe trying to make school reflect more about what's going to actually happen when you're in society. A variety of curriculum that inspires, and then appreciation for. I think there are some veteran teachers that feel somewhat funneled into the data-driven mold of teaching, and are having to sacrifice a lot of what they had worked to accomplish over their careers as teachers, and the richness that was in their classroom, that was and where students were they really were learning, but the thought of I think what we want more of is the appreciation of what veteran teachers have and what they've learned, and the ways that they can enrich learning, and not simply by doing more, test, react kind of thing. Did I get it all? Good?
What we wanted more of. Transparency in the evaluation of administration, a more open process with that. Regular communication, a more open communication, and I believe this was to do with parents and teachers and a proactive
more teacher initiated than always parents.
Right, so that the teachers go to the parents right away when there's issues rather than waiting. We had kind of two schools of thought on enrichment, more enriched programs for advanced students, but also enrichment not as a perk and not as an add-on and not as half an hour once a week, but as something that all students could participate in, not just advanced learners. More arts and more fostering of imaginative and creative thinking and creative writing, critical thinking, being taught to read and evaluate texts, not just for pulling facts out, but actually to be able to appreciate their reliability, for instance. More poetry, more music. Margaret wanted memorization to be returned. I think that's a good idea too. Playing outside more. So obviously more recess, less other things that we do instead of that. Science and U.S. history. People feel that needs to be given more focus. Social skills and something called a social curriculum. I don't know what that is, but building on the strengths and interests of students, which has to do with differentiated instruction depending on the student. Someone else said finding more ways to use community resources. We live in a very rich a town full of stuff, and arts and every other kind of thing. And more transparency in the school budget.
This is a much neater list. It's easier to read. What we think is working. The music curriculum, that's determined, we talked about that being elementary through high school. Physical fitness opportunities, particularly in the elementary school years. It was mentioned that families that have had transitions in of foster children or special needs children, that's been done seamlessly. So the transitioning in of children with particular needs has been great. Proactive for change, gosh, I don't know what that means, but that people have been proactive for change when things are not working in the elementary system. Scaffolding throughout the day, i.e. having activities before and after school that are enriching, from jump roping to math to various other things like that. The elementary schools in particular have done a great job building strong communities within each individual school while not down-putting the other schools. And the middle school, also in particular, that was what we had experience with, then broadens that community to the team experiences. That has been a really strong component of those schools. Enrichment programs, opportunities are individualized based on skill and interest. The amount of work that thought that teachers put into their work, collaborations, the amount of care that the teachers work put into their children, frankly. Sort of behind the scenes stuff that the rest of us might not see. Continued professional development for teachers to keep them up to date, in-service days, that sort of thing, is something that works well. Opportunities to challenge. I forget what that was, but it's good. I don't remember what we were talking about exactly. Projects based on reading, so where in elementary schools in particular, it is a theme-based thing where if you're reading a book that's about a particular thing, then going out into the community or outside to reenact it or to develop your understanding of it, that has worked really well. Flexibility with scheduling for outside opportunities, again, an elementary school thing primarily. The openness of the elementary schools to bringing in programming into classes that is using parent volunteers, some of the environmental stuff, some art stuff that has come into the schools using the resources of the parents and the broader community. Flexibility with scheduling for outside opportunities, particularly if there are students who have specific enrichment needs that need to happen during the day. There's been some transitioning that's worked very well for some families. Again, using parent volunteers in a productive way, school counseling. And then we talked about the fact that some things that are going on in the school system have unintended consequences. So they're working, but maybe not towards the goal that we as a community would hope that they are. So we wanted to raise that up too. And then somebody put on arts, music, responsiveness. And I don't know what that means because that was added after our conversation. So somebody with a red pen added that. Anybody?
Right next to you.
I know. She's gone. But it's working.
Different group.
Different group. Our group, given the budget parameters, and how did we arrive at our budget? You know, what influences our budget? Like the state's 5 cents, maybe 7 cents. The budget's composed of funds from where? How is it spent? The percentages on teachers and the percentages on extra programs, the enrichment programs, the catch-up programs. Help me out here, guys.
We asked an important question, and that is how do we help get this budget passed this year, because it's going to be probably a battle again. And we didn't get an answer to that question yet, hoping that we will.
This is a start to the answer to that question. Basically, this year the school board approved a budget that is only 0.49% of an increase over last year's budget. So we are basically level service this coming year for FY15. That still translates out to $15 million in change. You get these big numbers, they kind of toss off pretty easily. How to, as you say, how are we going to deal with those people who are going to say, cut $1 million off the budget? If any of you were there last year, you remember the individual that very cavalierly said that they wanted to cut $1 million. Where would you cut $1 million? When you start cutting that kind of money, you're cutting people, cutting programs. It's not, use 3 pencils instead of 4, use half a sheet of paper instead of a full sheet of paper. It's a significant cut.
I can jump in too.
Pardon?
I can jump in.
You want to jump? I would appreciate.
I think one thing that we did also talk about was the fact that many of the ideas that came up this evening can exist or coexist with a hard budget reality, and that it's an opportunity to think about how we shift maybe the direction of where we are going, but not necessarily the budget framework which we are having to operate in. And so there's an opportunity to continue the conversation based on what might be possible, what things can we do without having to get too caught up in the budget, which is going to be a very hard conversation to really change or affect in a significant way, unless it's 4 hours of debate on $1 million cut that was posited at the last second and surprised everybody. So I think we want to focus on what we can do, not dwell too much on the budget itself.
There's a number of ideas that are brought out to maybe utilize some of the existing skills and experience that we have in the schools we are not utilizing right now, older students mentoring younger students. You know, here you have an entire wealth of education to maybe bring up a younger student that is having a difficult time by pairing them up with an older student who does not have that difficult time, and it's mutually beneficial. A lot of the things that were brought up in the prior conversations could actually impact the budget, but not right now. Trying to impact the budget today would be like trying to turn the Titanic. It's going to be done, but maybe not soon enough to satisfy some people. Andy, you have your hand up?
Yeah, well, you asked for some advice on the budget, hard questions that could possibly come up again. And at the very beginning tonight, I think when David stood up and said, you know, that we have, I think, nationally and internationally really good outcomes in Vermont. But that's not what the public is hearing. There is a disconnect to what the public hears. Every year, we almost get a stock news story. Schools, elementary schools, are failing. They're not making adequate yearly progress. And I know that whole thing is changing, but the public is confused by that. And some people in the public say, well, of course they're changing the test system now because by 2014 everyone was supposed to be at grade level, and oops, they're not. There's a lot, I think, that the educational community has perhaps fallen down on in terms of selling the value that the public is getting. There's people who don't think they're getting value for that $15 million. So my suggestion would be that part of it is finding a way to convey to the public a way of that we have success. We do have a lot of success. But the other piece of it is what I heard tonight. There's a lot of changes and values that were expressed in this meeting tonight don't necessarily cost money. They're turning the ship in a different direction without adding decks to the ship or adding, you know, new smokestacks to the or new deck chairs on the ship. And, you know, there's an old bumper sticker, and I sort of rewrote it. The best things in education are not things. And a lot of what's been talked about tonight has to do with trusting people, honoring experience of teachers, giving more autonomy to teachers, taking some of the surveillance, really, that some teachers are feeling coming down at them, which is a lack of trust. And there's actually schools in this county that are trumpeting a different tune than has been trumpeted in Brattleboro about trusting teachers, empowering teachers to teach from their passion, to start new projects, things that will turn on the students, things that will involve them in hands-on projects. So, not to say another word, but I'm just saying that we know we do well in Vermont, but there's a big section of our population that's stressed financially who doesn't believe they're getting that value. How can we convey that? And how can we also say and convince the public that we have a really great school system that's not about money, essentially, that we're really utilizing our human resources, our resources of knowledge, our resources of inspiration. And that's where we need to go to sell the school budget.
Well, Andy, perhaps you were that.
Mark, I'm gonna, because well, I don't mind interrupting you. I don't want to interrupt Andy, but I'll
perhaps you're the harbinger of what's to come. This is the first of maybe many things to come. We have members of the Fifth Estate here who hopefully will report the positive things that are coming out of this evening.
Yeah.
And that can be a start.
And hopefully, and I hope that all of you will as well and stay engaged. We're past our time. And the remainder of the program was a video which we can post so people can see it. I wanted to ask people to please give us your email on the sheets that are on all these tables or anywhere on any piece of paper that's got anything written on it. We'll gather it and get it, and we'll send you when the website is up. We got a name. We've got our it's BrattleboroSchoolBoard.org, but it's not there yet, so don't try to find it. But one of the first things we'll do is put the situational analysis up there so you can see it. And it's going to be an opportunity for you to send us information, to sign up to get information from us, and another step in the process of getting information in and getting information out. So I can't, without getting misty, I can't really say how much I appreciate you all coming and kind of, giving us a good start to this process. I think we've got plenty to work with now. again, we're all, contact all of us if you're.
Please give your heartfelt thanks to Jill and Dave, who really carried the line.